Let's first shed light on Focus on Health Law. This is a proud presentation of attorney Kenneth Haber of Boyd's, Maryland. This week on the set, our moderator is, as usual, attorney Ramesh Khurana from the Khurana Law Firm from Gaithersburg, Maryland. Let's get ready to view these two attorneys in their question-answer session on Medicare exclusions and waivers.
Welcome to the Capital Forum. Today I have a very close friend of mine who's in the studio, and he's going to answer my questions regarding Medicare exclusion and waivers. My name is Ramesh Khurana. I'm an attorney at law. I have my office in Gaithersburg. So welcome, Kenneth.
Thank you, Ramesh.
How are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
Good. So I know that you are a former Assistant United States Attorney.
Yes, sir.
And the former senior attorney in the Office of Inspector General.
I plead guilty to both those counts that I was such.
Thank you.
And I'm very, very grateful that I was able to be that.
You are not convicted.
No. I'm blessed by them.
You are blessed. I know. So, Ken, today I am going to ask you questions about Medicare exclusions and waivers. And now, please explain to us what is a Medicare exclusion by the OIG and what are its effects elsewhere?
Yes. If you're a healthcare provider, one of the last things you want is an exclusion, because not only does it stop you from receiving any sort of Medicare payments, you cannot order, you cannot prescribe, you cannot be involved, and for the most part, you can't even be in the same office where Medicare is done. Because you can't be paid out of Medicare funds. So it's the type of thing
that basically force you out of practice, literally.
Well, at least
in regard to Medicare.
In regard to Medicare,
yeah.
You can possibly do private pay.
Yeah.
And but there's other implications of the exclusion, because once you're excluded, then you go into the data bank.
Here you go.
And
this is what I meant.
And then when you're in the data bank, then all the private insurance companies, they don't want you involved either.
Adverse chain sets in.
Oh, terrible one. It's a crushing one.
Yeah.
So you're now really to a cash payment type of thing. So hopefully, if you're in some sort of practice that's a niche practice, you can survive. Example being, a lot of pain management doctors do not get involved with insurance. But you have to be legitimate about it, or else you're going to find another visitor. That's your DEA agent putting you out of business permanently.
Right. Okay. Now, for what reasons are individuals and entities excluded in the first place?
Well, there's a number of such reasons. The obvious one is if you've been convicted of Medicare fraud or Medicaid fraud or any of the other government programs.
Okay, that's quite obvious.
Yes. Abuse. If you've been convicted of abuse, that's...
Abuse of what?
Patient abuse.
Oh, patient abuse.
If you've been convicted of patient abuse...
Not any domestic violence issue or something like that.
No, not domestic violence, but if you've been convicted of patient abuse, you cannot even get a waiver, and we're going to be talking about the waivers, obviously, but you can't even get a waiver. If you've been convicted of Medicare fraud, you could possibly get a waiver. But if you've been convicted of abuse of a patient, there is no waiver.
That is so sensitive an
issue. That is so sensitive an issue. There also would be, like, if you don't properly produce documentation to the government when they ask for it, you can get excluded. If you are filing claims with insufficient documentation, you can be excluded.
But patient abuse, no waiver.
No waiver for patient abuse. They take that as
absolutely under no circumstances.
Absolutely under no circumstances.
Is there any motion for reconsideration, etc.? Nothing of the sort.
Well, if you've been convicted of it, or if you've been convicted of patient abuse, that conviction is not challenged. You can't challenge it. And,
I see.
And the Inspector General's office on the exclusions, they have in their regulations that you can't take it into court. so their decision is final normally. I said normally.
So, okay, they pay deference basically to the agency interpretation.
Yes.
Like whatever decision
Yes,
they have made.
exactly. They're going to give great deference to the
okay.
agency decision. And there's a number of other type of violations you can do that can result in your exclusion. They have a laundry list of things. So what you need to do is make sure that you're a responsible citizen in terms of healthcare citizen when you're rendering your services in order not to fall into one of the areas where you can be excluded. If you lose your license, medical license, if it's suspended for more than 30 days, you can end up excluded. They will normally give it back to you once your suspension is lifted, but they don't have to. Just think of all the things that a doctor shouldn't do. Basically, those things are the type of things can get you into an exclusion situation.
Now, let's talk about the reinstatement into the Medicare. Now, if an individual or entity, wants to be reinstated, so what's the process involved?
Reinstatement, normally when they exclude you, it's for a finite period of time. Once that period of time occurs, now it's not always for finite, sometimes they'll put it down as indefinite. But for a finite period of time, then once that period of time runs, then you can apply for reinstatement. And as often as I feel that they may be harsh in terms of the exclusions, I find in reinstatements they're also very generous at times and understanding in terms of sometimes clients had good faith mistake of what the exclusion's been, and we've had decent success in establishing to the Inspector General their people's good faith and not to hold it against them.
So good faith is the buzzword.
Well, it's not in any of the books. It's not in any of the regulations,
Right.
but in
But it
terms
does
of being able, it helps.
Yeah.
Definitely helps.
Okay.
Because they have been and are reasonable about the reinstatement process, but you can find yourself in a situation where you still have to earn a living somehow, and you got another year, 5 years, 10 years on your exclusion, and the question becomes, what can you do?
Right.
And that's where the waiver word comes in.
Yeah. Okay, then I think you are ready to answer questions about the waivers, right?
I would say
So
it's
we
a good
have
time.
talked about exclusions. Now let us come to the waivers. So what's a Medicare waiver of exclusion, and again, what an individual can do to obtain the waiver?
Well, it used to be very difficult. I had obtained a waiver for an individual. We had to go at that time to the Medicaid director and have the Medicaid director request the waiver of Medicare. And Medicare would always follow through, not only what they'll do is request a waiver of the Medicaid exclusion, and when they waive the Medicaid exclusion, they would waive the Medicare exclusion as well. And recently, within the last few years, and I forget which the name of the statute is that did it, but they expanded the waiver so that it's not just the Medicaid funding agency, but any federal or state funding agency that requests a waiver of exclusion, that the Inspector General's office will consider it. And they're generally liberal in their interpretation of that, feeling that if the funding agency is willing to ask for the waiver, and there's grounds, specific grounds that have to be alleged in order to get the waiver.
Can you please give some of the grounds
Yes,
based on which
yes,
you can
yes.
seek a waiver?
If this was the sole the sole physician in a community, that would be a ground.
Okay.
Or if the physician was the sole source of a specialized medical service. And the one that I had applied for years ago, the guy was in rural Oregon or rural Washington, I don't remember where. And
So basically, if you are in a medically unserved area,
that
right?
helps, yes.
So that would
That
help.
greatly
Okay.
helps. Or you could actually be in a medically underserved inner city area where they don't have a bunch of doctors' offices.
There are certain areas in Washington D.C.
Absolutely,
Right.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And the Inspector General's office, recognizes that it doesn't have to be just a rural area, and the application has to be where you're the sole source, or that that you're the sole source of medical services or sole source of specialized medical services in the community. And with that, the Inspector General can exercise its discretion. Without those allegations, those assertions by the funding agency, then the Inspector General doesn't have discretion.
Okay.
They're serious about following the limits of their discretion. It's a serious agency and they're doing a serious business, even though I'm seriously sometimes not pleased with them.
Right. I know. Now, there are certain limitations which are placed on the waiver. Can you please explain some of those limitations?
Yeah, let's assume that that the physician is the only OBGYN in a rural area. And, it shouldn't be that the patient has to drive 30, 40 miles to get to, a hospital where there's no OBGYN. In his own local community, there should be an OBGYN, or even a primary care physician, family physician. In many areas of America, rural America, they just don't have these people. And if you can get the funding agency, one of the funding agencies, to request, and there's a way of doing that. You want to build up support in terms of from your local state representative, your local state senator. You want to develop support from any of the state officials, to ask for the state director of Medicaid, or to ask for one of the federal funding agencies or state funding agencies directors to ask for that waiver, because it takes that one of those people to ask for it. It's just not asked for just because the city council voted for it, but it would be good to have the city council or the town council also asking that director of whichever funding source to seek it, so that it gives them a realistic reason for what they're doing, in terms of that it's a legitimate need of the local community, and so people can't look at them as being soft on crime or soft on something that's bad.
Right. So, can you tell us about the procedure to obtain a waiver? Now, I want to take you back a little bit. Tell us what are the steps involved in obtaining that waiver, like 1, 2, 3.
1, 2, 3. Well,
Yeah.
it actually depends on the individual circumstances,
On a case-by-case
on a
basis.
case-by-case basis, because you're talking about basically lobbying, entity to work with you to ask it of the Inspector General. A question that
Will it be a good idea to hire a lawyer to represent you so that he can better present your case before the OIG?
Yes. Well, it's better present your case to the funding agency to help organize that process. And the fact of the matter is that what is requested is what is granted, and you have to be specific about what you want to request, because they're not going to grant more than you're requesting.
More than you demand.
And if you don't request the full area of your services, then it's not going to be granted, and then you're not going to be able to do your whole function.
Right.
So it has to.
You have to ask for it.
Yeah, you have to ask for it.
As you ask in the court, you file a prayer. What do you need? And then, of course, you add up and say whatever else is deemed appropriate by the court.
Right.
Right.
And in this particular situation, it's only good for that particular state. And indeed, it may very well be only good for that particular function, that job.
Great.
That community.
Great.
It would be only for that community.
Well, I think time is over. Now we have to wrap it up. Ken,
Thank you very much
for coming to the studio and answering my questions.
I greatly appreciate being here.
I appreciate your presence here.